Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our kickoff of the learning journey in regenerative finance. I see you all are doing a nice job of saying hello and introducing yourselves in the chat box, so please keep doing that. I'll be your presenter, your facilitator today, Joe Brewer. Really excited about this, as are our other hosts. So PJ, Penny, Jeff, and Tyler, who are also helping to host this learning journey and our community Zoom calls and the activities around everything we'll be doing together in the next 2 months. We've all been anxiously anticipating this day where we can get started together. So I'm super, super excited to be here with you guys. And I wanted to give you another activity in addition to saying hello in the chat box. I've got a really simple question here, this poll. So I just made it visible. So if you could maybe just vote on this, how are you feeling about getting started in this learning journey today? I've given a couple of different kinds of options. You can give the one that is the most honest, the one that feels the most right for you. And we'll see how everyone's feeling. I can see we've got 29 people live with us at the moment. So we're about a third of the total number who have enrolled for the learning journey. And what we're going to be doing today is really setting a lot of context. And since this is the first live webinar for this learning journey, I'll just, stall for a moment before we start with the presentation part so that those who don't quite know how to use Crowdcast can join us. This session and all of these sessions will be recorded, so you can come back to the same link that you're at right now in your web browser to come back and watch the replay later. And so we'll have a nice archive of our conversations together. And our intention is to do 8 of these. So we'll have 8 weeks, 8 live webinars, and following each of these on Tuesday and Wednesday will be Group A and Group B community Zoom calls. So if you haven't chosen a group to join yet, I'd like to invite you to go to the Earth Regenerators platform, look at the options for Group A and Group B, which are different time zones, see which one of them you prefer, and then join that group, because you're going to be invited to build deeper relationships with the other members of this learning journey in those community Zoom calls. So today, what we're going to be doing is kind of like the getting started, the orientation. Like, what is this learning journey? How did it come into being? What are we trying to do here? Why is it so important to do this now? Like, these are some of the questions we'll be asking ourselves today. And I can see by glancing at the poll that a lot of people are excited and curious, and several of you are ready and engaged. Let's just get started and do this. And I totally agree. One little bit of logistical housekeeping for Crowdcast, which is the live streaming platform that we're using for these webinars. For those of you who aren't familiar, if you look in the bottom of your screen, basically right there, you'll see a little option that says Ask a Question. So I'm going to give a presentation for 15 or 20 minutes today. We'll be able to use the rest of our time, up to a total of an hour, to have discussions. And anytime during the presentation or afterwards, you can go to this Ask a Question button right here, and you can write a question and post it. And then we will use those questions to have our Q&A and our discussion. Also, you can vote for the questions you would most like to hear answered. So what we'll do is we will go to the questions in the popularity order. The questions that get the most votes will be addressed first, and then we'll move down the line. In other Earth Regenerators webinars, I've also invited the person asking the question into a split screen where they could join the video call and have conversations, which we may do today as well. So if you ask a question, I might invite you to join me on the screen to discuss the question and its answer, and be sure that you can clarify what you mean and we get everything answered well enough and all of this. Also, every one of our webinars, people have gotten a lot of use out of this chat box on the side, this sidebar chat box. You can post links, you can ask questions, you can start discussions over there with other members who are participating in the session with us. And wow, we're up to 41 people live with us at the moment. Seems like this might be a good time for us to go ahead and get started with the presentation. So just as the refresher, the basic flow today is I'm going to give a 15 or 20-minute presentation. You can ask a question in this button right here and vote for questions you'd like to have answered. And then after the presentation part, we'll have the remainder of the hour for us to go through those questions and have discussion. But at any time, post comments, links, start discussions in the chat box with the other members who are participating. And then be ready, be thinking, be feeling how these community Zoom calls that start tomorrow and Wednesday for the two different groups, how we'll build on what happens in these presentations in those sessions. So with that said, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen, and then we'll start the presentation part of today's webinar. And yes, JP is asking if it's recording. These are always recorded, so it's recorded automatically. And just come back to the same link, and it will be available for automatic replay like 30 seconds or a minute after the session's over. So it happens really quick. Awesome. With that said, I'm going to go into screen share, and we will get started. Okay. So today's session is the kickoff for the learning journey in regenerative finance. And I wanted to explain briefly why I chose this image, aside from the fact that it's beautiful and elegant and evocative. I had a sort of secret message, a hidden code that I put into choosing this as a metaphor. What you can see in this wrinkling wave of a ribbon that's almost like electricity, it's sort of like water flowing. What this image represents to me is the dynamic pattern of emergence in a complex system, where there are a lot of interacting parts and new patterns arise, where there are focal points and brilliant emphasis and moments of calm and quiet, intense activity and times for reflection. For me, this graphic represents the journey we're embarking on, where we do not know the structure ahead of time for what this is going to look and feel like a little further down as all of it flows forward in time. We're going to be dancing and surfing and improvising during the next 2 months of this learning journey, which means as a facilitator, I'll be learning right along beside you. And so with that said, let's get started. I wanted to begin by creating a sort of contrast that right now the world is structured around a set of dominant institutions that are built on absolutely childish, silly, and absurd representations of the world. And one of the best places to look for that is in economics departments at universities. If you go to an economics department, in the first year, along with all of the incoming students, you will learn neoclassical economics, which is also the basis of almost all policymaking done in the world today. Just to give you a sense of neoclassical economics and what it says, it's very mathematical, and so they have to make simplifying assumptions to make their mathematics work. So for example, to study the economy, they treat it like a market of exchanges between individual people. And they actually consider the financial system and government to be outside of the economy. Now, if you've ever participated in politics where money influences electoral outcomes, or if you've ever seen the distorting and profound power of something like Wall Street, you'd know that finance is a form of governance, that governance and institutions of governing are part of the economy, and they're all connected. So this idea that they're separate from each other already takes us pretty far from reality. But also there's this thing called methodological individualism, which basically says, God, this world, it's so complex. Let's just pretend that the world is comprised of individual people. Each of these individual people is a special kind of rational machine, like a calculator, that takes the information about prices of products and services on the market, calculates the best deal, and tries to maximize its self-return. And this is what's called the theory of rational action, for anyone who's curious. What's interesting is that human beings don't behave this way at all. The very first time that behavioral scientists studied this model of economics, they actually won the Nobel Prize in economics for disproving it, for showing that human behavior doesn't work this way. And that was Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky for work they did back in the 1970s. And they got the Nobel Prize in the early 90s. So more than 25 years ago, the Nobel Prize in economics was given to disprove the primary way that economics is taught in universities today. That is neoclassical economics. The real world, on the other hand, is grounded in its foundation in ecology, in the real world and all of its ecological relationships, and economies and government and money, the flow of materials, social norms and values, all the aspects of culture, they're all meshed up together. They're never separate. So in the real world, we need a different way of thinking about economics. So that gives us a way of describing our task in this learning journey. We want to learn how to create regenerative finance projects and put them out into the world, and we want them to work, which means our task is to create models of economics that are based on the real world, which means we're not going to be drawing very much from the official field of economics to do this, for lots of interesting reasons, like the example I just gave with neoclassical economics. But we'll have to look for economics elsewhere to see how it really works to be able to build these models. Okay, we're on this learning journey in regenerative finance, but what is this learning journey? Like, how did it get here? What's its history? What's the backstory? I'm just going to give a very narrow version of the backstory, which relates to how I ended up being your presenter today, which goes back a little more than a year, back to December of 2019, when we gave birth to Earth Regenerators, which now has almost 2,700 members. It's an open access platform, a gift economy, a way of learning together without having to pay for anything, just coming and learning and sharing, creating projects together. Lots of beautiful things have happened in Earth Regenerators since it was created about 16 months ago. One thing that happened in March of last year was I gave a webinar on the Earth Regeneration Fund, explaining how to create a regenerative finance model for a portfolio of projects that are all in the same territory to help create an economy that is fundamentally regenerative and bioregional in scale. And this webinar was really popular. It stimulated a lot of follow-up conversations, and it eventually led, starting in the beginning of December, to the launch of the Barichara Regeneration Fund in Barichara, Colombia, which is a prototype for the Earth Regeneration Fund at the territorial scale of this bioregion in the northern Andes of Colombia. So between the beginning of December and roughly now, we had a work group in the Barichara Regeneration Fund that raised money, that has started projects, that is now beginning a nature reserve, setting up local governance, creating a community grants program. We are doing regenerative finance. One of the members of our host team for this learning journey, Tyler Wakefield, is an ambassador for the Seeds Regenerative Currency, which is a network of cryptocurrency practitioners trying to bring money into regenerative projects. The Seeds community offered to give us a gift of 100,000 of their seeds, their cryptocurrency, that we could use for building the Barichara Regeneration Fund. So we decided to ask for a $20 donation, and each person who gave a $20 donation would receive 1,000 of these seeds, which at the time was worth about $30. So it's a pretty good investment to donate $20 and receive $30 worth of seeds. But as we started talking about how seeds and cryptocurrency in general is confusing to a lot of people, people don't know how to use cryptocurrency to do real world things. So we said, what if we invite all the people who donate to this campaign to join a learning journey where we will give birth to regenerative projects, and people could use their seeds currency in those projects or fiat currencies, money issued by governments. And so we decided to weave the community of Earth Regenerators with members of the Seeds community and anyone else who got wind of this campaign, and we'd work on growing our capacities together. So the idea is this learning journey has grown out of this history and is building capacity around a lot of other things that came before. And we want to connect this learning journey with real world projects, like what we're doing here in Colombia and in other places around the world. So here we are. At last count, I think there were 126 people who donated to the campaign. something like 95 people who signed up for the course from that group of 126. So right now we have about 100 people in this group. Who are we? Why did we gather here? Well, we're going to spend a lot of time next week and in the community Zoom calls of this week talking about how to form effective groups and how to manage common pooled assets. And we'll get into that later. But for now, I just want to say it's really important for all of this to work that we have two things that are very clear: a shared sense of identity for everyone who's in this learning journey, and a shared sense of purpose. So right here, I'm proposing a shared identity and shared purpose. And maybe during the community Zoom calls or during the Q&A, we can clarify these if you want to change any of it or have any questions to be sure you understand. The basic idea is this: our shared identity in this learning journey, if we've done everything correctly up to this point, is the people who gathered here are those who want to regenerate the earth, regenerate ecosystems and landscapes, bring humans back into harmony with nature. And they want to do this by taking concrete actions together. They don't want to do things on their own. They want to find a community. They want to work with partners. They want to have friends. They want people who understand the way they see the world. And so the shared identity is those seeking to regenerate the earth who want to take concrete actions together. Our shared purpose, if that's the case, would be to study and practice regenerative finance so we can give birth to real-world projects. This isn't an academic exercise. We're not going to just sit around and talk about all the cool ways we could change the world and then do nothing. There's no time to waste. We need to build these real-world projects. So our purpose in this learning journey is to study what regenerative finance is, to practice living in regenerative economic ways, and to create real-world projects with real impacts. So that's my proposal for our shared identity and purpose. Obviously, it's just a first draft, so we can discuss it in the Q&A and in the community Zoom calls, as well as on the platform for the course. But that's what I'm proposing as a starting point. As I'd mentioned in a post that I put onto the course page, our basic structure and flow is that for 8 weeks, we'll have a live webinar every Monday at this time, followed by 2 parallel community Zoom calls, one on Tuesday, one on Wednesday, Group A and Group B. And we're going to use the asynchronous forum, the online forum of Earth Regenerators, to post discussions, add reference materials, engage in conversations, and from all of this together, create project teams and give birth to real-world projects. We want to try and do this in the next 2 months. So this is the basic structure and flow, and we'll talk more about this as we go along. At the same time, there's a pattern logic, a way of thinking about the pattern of how we're going about doing this, which is we want to shape the emergent flow. Just like that picture I showed at the beginning, there's a flow of chaos and creativity, and it's very emergent, moment to moment. So that means we take the community relationships as they form and we weave them into tapestries. And then we can organize ourselves as members of this learning journey around the actions that really call us, that we say, this needs to happen and I'm going to help do it. This is the energy, the impetus, the passion, and the creativity that will give birth to the projects. You're going to create the projects, you're going to run the projects, and you're going to feel really enlivened and engaged doing so if you organize yourself around the actions you care about. And if you do that woven into a tapestry of community relationships where you feel held, supported, and seen. Now, if we do all that, we're going to learn a ton. So then we need to share what we learn, which we'll start by sharing with each other, the other members of the learning journey. So basically, it's build community, give birth to emergent projects using this pattern logic. Make sense? Why do we need to do this? Well, you might have noticed, if you watched the news or read just about any scientific report in the last 50 years, that our planet is in absolute crisis. If you've read my book, The Design Pathway for Regenerating Earth, you'll know that we are midway through planetary collapse, and it ain't over yet. What I wanted to do right now is share with you 3 imminent, catastrophic planetary scale processes that are underway right now. Okay, the first one is methane release. In the Siberian tundra, in the northern part of the Eurasian continent, is a massive ice field of old dead plant matter plant matter that's 4 meters, or like 15 or 16 feet thick. And it's full of methane, little tiny bubbles of methane stuck in the ice. And as that ice melts, as that permafrost melts, it releases this methane. The thing you need to know about methane is that a single molecule of methane releases more heat into the atmosphere than 20 molecules of carbon dioxide. Now, it doesn't stay in the atmosphere quite as long, but as all this methane is exploded into the atmosphere, it will double the amount of heat energy trapped in the Earth's atmosphere compared to all burning of fossil fuels in the last 150 years. This is happening right now. The permafrost is thawing. The second big thing that's happening is called the blue ocean event. Now, you might notice if you look at the ocean from space, like in this picture, that it tends to be dark blue in color. But if you look at ice, like ice over the Arctic Ocean, it tends to be white. If there's ice in the Arctic Ocean, it's highly reflective, sending solar energy back into space. If it melts during the Northern Hemisphere summer when the sun is shining in the north, then you go from 90% of sunlight reflected to space to 90% of sunlight absorbed by the ocean. So when we finally have ice-free Arctic Ocean during the summer, which is scheduled to happen in the next couple of years, we will have a transformational change of the Earth's planetary climate in a matter of months and a few years. This is called the blue ocean event, planetary turbulence due to rapid heating of the poles. A third thing that's happening is that there's a great conveyor belt. It's called the thermohaline circulation. Thermohaline just means temperature and salt. And the thermohaline circulation is a giant conveyor belt moving energy through the world's ocean currents. Well, because Greenland has a bunch of ice on it and it's melting quickly, that's releasing fresh water into the North Atlantic. And it's already showing signs this conveyor belt is weakening. If this conveyor belt shuts down, we'll basically have a chaotic shift in heat mixing in the Earth's ocean, which would have a catastrophic amplification of chaos in our weather systems and the climate. So this conveyor belt is shutting down now. The fourth thing is the collapse of the Amazon rainforest due to deforestation and fragmentation of the ecological corridors. Short story here is that we're within the next 3 or 4 years, this thing called the biotic pump of the Amazon is going to shut down, and the Amazon will have a quick cascade of moving from forest to savanna and grassland, releasing huge amounts of CO2, and a mass extinction event begins. All 4 of these things are happening now, and they are imminent. We will see that they have transpired in the next 10 to 15 years, continuing thereafter. And we have to create regenerative projects in the midst of this planetary chaos. It is time to get to work. There is no time to waste. All right? And in the midst of all of this planetary stuff, there's also a ton of social stuff happening. Peak oil and impacts for energy grid, disruptions to supply chains, global pandemics, a lot of conflicts over resources, misinformation and propaganda, authoritarianism and fundamentalism, and a lot more. There's so much stuff happening right now that our heads are spinning and we're overwhelmed trying to keep up with it. Somehow, in the midst of all of this, we need to give birth to a planetary scale regenerative movement. So I share this with you not to scare you, not to overwhelm you, but just to remind us that we are doing this work in the midst of a planetary emergency. It's already decades too late to stop many of these things from happening. They are basically inevitable at this point in time because actions were not taken in the 1970s and 1980s. And so we have to deal with all of this. It's our job, it's our task. And if you're like me with a 4-year-old daughter, you have a pretty strong responsibility for doing the right thing now for the people who will be adults as all of this gets a lot worse 20 to 30 years from now. So this is the context in which we do our work. Okay. Take a breath. Ooh, that's a lot. Okay. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. The way we regenerate the planet, the way we safeguard humanity's future, is to cultivate the conditions for trust and cooperation between people. We do this not at the scale of the planet, we do this at the scale of small, functioning groups. Then we weave those groups together. If we do that, we go onward as fellow humans. We go onward as humanity. So we need to learn how to work in these small, functioning groups. This is so important, so important. And that's what we're going to practice by having project teams for regenerative finance on this learning journey. Okay, so there's a recipe. The recipe is cultivate the conditions for trust and cooperation, whatever that is. We'll be talking more about that. And we do this at the scale of small groups, like sports teams, like business startups, like this size, groups of 5 people, groups of 10 people, doing really strategic, very intelligent things. Okay, that sounds doable. Let's do it. All right, this creating small functioning teams with trust and cooperation. This is applied cultural evolution. We want to bring together what is known about collaborative groups with our understanding that we are in planetary collapse, and then engage, immerse ourselves in regenerative design while living through the rest of the planetary collapse. And we'll be using this pro-social framework, which will be the lead topic for next week's webinar. We'll be using this framework to help us do it, and a lot of other frameworks too. So this is a learning journey about regenerative finance. What is regenerative finance? It's really helpful to recognize that finance is nothing more than a set of coordination tools. So finance can be money. You could use money to say, what is the value of something and how do you coordinate the exchange of things of value in a market? So money is a subset of finance. Really, all finance is a set of coordination tools. How do you coordinate between what's being produced over here, what's needed over there, and how the two relate to each other in some in-between place? And finance is a set of tools for doing that. Finance is part of an economy because all this coordination is happening within economic production, economic distribution, economic consumption, economic decomposition and recycling, and so on. And all of this occurs within deeper ecological contexts. So regenerative finance is the set of coordination tools for flow of value within an economy that functions as an ecology. What? All right, let's talk about that. Regeneration. If we're talking about regenerative finance, all that regeneration is the natural dynamic of all living systems. What the Chilean philosophers and scientists Humberto Maturana and Francisco Varela called autopoiesis. Poiesis is the same word as poetry, the same Latin root. Autopoiesis is the self-generated ability to express oneself, which is how a paramecium, or some single-celled organism, seeks out in its environment the food and energy it needs to re-express its ability to seek out food and reproduce its ability to seek out food. See, it's the natural dynamic of a living system to maintain the conditions for being alive moment to moment. Now, I chose this image because it's well known that human skin, the largest organ of our bodies, goes through a regeneration process every 30 days. All of the skin you see in this picture is dead skin cells. If you go deep into the skin, you'll find fatty tissue called subcutaneous tissue, which has the capillaries and blood vessels in it. That is actually the living skin. And it pushes upward and makes this hard shell that is the outer skin with pores and hair and other things in between. And it acts as a membrane for regulating the body's temperature and other things. So every 30 days, you completely replace the skin on your body. There is a self-organizing pattern of reproducing the conditions of healthy skin every 30 days. That is, your skin is regenerated every 30 days. It is that pattern of regeneration that we want to look for in all aspects of living systems, and then bring finance as a set of coordinating tools to those regenerative dynamics. Does that sort of make sense? We'll discuss that more. So right now, I just wanted to use this as like an inspirational prompt. If we understand that there are living system dynamics of recreating the conditions of being healthy and alive, that there needs to be coordinating tools for an economy to behave that way, and that's the role of regenerative finance. So we need to have coordinating tools for value creation, value distribution, value exchange, value decomposition to reproduce the conditions of regeneration in the living systems that are our economies. So if that's what regenerative finance is, how can we start to practice? There's going to be an art and a craft to this, as well as some science, some technical knowledge. How do we begin to practice doing this? Well, we can do that by focusing on the conversational dynamics of our own learning journey. As we go into the community Zoom calls, as we participate in these webinars, as we participate in the course forum on Earth Regenerators, we can experience how value is created and how the value flows across our social groups. So right now you can see that you're watching slides put together by me, organized by learning that I did in the past, using software technology to enable me to present to you on a crowdcast platform like this. And you can start to think, how is the value created? How does it flow? How does the information get coordinated? How do you benefit from the value? How do you make use of it? What might you give back to me? What don't I need back? If you notice these conversational dynamics as we create and exchange value, you'll start to experience regenerative economics, and you'll start to experience the coordination of regenerative economics, which means if you know how to pay attention, you'll start to see that you are living out regenerative finance by participating in a good learning experience and in a good conversation. And that's going to be a way that we're going to use this week with the community Zoom calls. We're going to focus on our conversational dynamics. We're going to get into small groups in the community Zoom calls. And in those small groups, we're going to pay attention to how our groups are creating and sharing value. And this is like prototyping. We're just observing an economy of conversation and information that creates value. So it might behave like a regenerative economy. And if so, there's going to be coordination of that value, which means there is an implicit kind of finance. But notice no money is exchanging hands. Finance is not reducible to money. Money is just one coordinating tool among many. So we're going to look for trust, rapport, engagement, comfort, safety, security, and other kinds of values that are being created in those conversations and ask ourselves, how does that relate to regenerative finance? How could I use that experience to create regenerative finance tools? See, this is what we're going to be doing in the beginning of this learning journey. Okay, this is an experiential process. We're going to experience as the process. And in that way, we're going to create prototypes of regenerative economies. What I want to stress really clearly is what this is not. This is not what is normally called regenerative finance today. Regenerative finance today, if you hear anyone say it, is probably what rich people think is regenerative finance, which goes under the other name of impact investing. Impact investing is restricted through the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US and similar bodies of government in other countries, that you needed an accredited investor. To be an accredited investor, you need at least $1 million US to play the game. So to be an impact investor, you got to be rich. You got to have $1 million. This excludes 99% of the human population. So if we want to create regenerative finance for people, not just for extremely rich people, then impact investing is not where we're going to look. Because we're also going to find that as much as impact investing claims to be creating regenerative finance, it falls short of the mark so often that it's kind of an embarrassment to the field of impact investing. So we can look to areas of finance in the dominant extractive system that is nowhere close to regenerative, and see that good-intentioned people are still using the tools and the values and the institutions of that system, like being an accredited investor. And in doing so, they are taking themselves out of the regenerative finance game. Because the regenerative finance game is like a living organism. It starts small with a self-reproducing pattern and then grows larger and more complex. If you start at the scale of $1 million, you're very likely to ever become regenerative. If you start at the scale of $5, you just might. And so, let's see how we might do that. Here on Earth Regenerators, we've actually been creating a regenerative economy. We've got a set of platform curators hosting different work groups. Delegates from those work groups are working together to create platform functions. These capacities are giving birth to a free design school. So if you've been participating in Earth Regenerators in the last 16 months, given in the spirit of a gift economy, you don't have to pay anything. You just come and create value by participating in the learning experiences. You don't have to have $1 million to play this game. And the Earth Regenerators community is engaging in regenerative economics on small scales. Doing things like hosting book clubs and watching documentaries together and having discussions, creating value and learning with each other on very small scales among small groups of people. So there's already a social dynamic of regenerative economics happening on this platform without ever reaching $1 million and without ever calling it impact investing. And by the way, Earth Regenerators is not even an organization. It's just a mobile app on my phone that I use as the host to invite people to join for free. There's not even an organization behind it. That's how informal it is. Also, when we created the Bodichara Regeneration Fund during the months of December and January, we raised $50,000 in donations, which includes $15,000 in zero interest loans, so $35,000 in donations. And with this, we've been able to buy a piece of land here in Colombia that we're setting up as a nature reserve for reforestation of the native forest. And we're beginning a community grant program with local leadership that is representing local regenerative projects. Now notice that we're doing this with $50,000 raised from a network of people where the single largest contribution was $3,000, and the typical, the average, the normal amount that's donated was about $25. So here we have regenerative investors working as donors, giving small amounts of money and enabling a regenerative finance system to work, which is this Barichara Regeneration Fund. Now we're going to talk more about the history of this fund and its mechanisms and its design criteria. We'll talk about all of that later. I just wanted to use it now as an example that by gathering together small donations from a few hundred people, we raised $50,000 and are building a regenerative finance system that is doing work at the scale of a 200,000 hectare territory, basically a bunch of river basins within the mountain range of the northern Andes. And so this is just to let us know that impact investing is nowhere near as agile, creative, or effective as what we're going to do with this $50,000 because our regenerative economics focuses on the work group, the donors, the investors, the designers, the people who are building it together. So just wanted to give that as an example of how we're going to be doing this work together in the next 2 months. Okay. If we start this journey without presuming to be experts in regenerative finance, we're starting with the beginner's mind. And in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities not yet explored. In the expert's mind, they've already critically discarded most of the ideas. Well, here's a disturbing fact. There are very few regenerative finance projects in existence, but there's a lot of greenwashing. A lot of people saying they're doing regenerative things, but if you look inside, look at their model, look at how they relate to their communities, you'll find that many of these are not actually regenerative. Okay, that means we don't look there for the solutions. The inspiring fact is this. If we can create this beginner's mind together, we can learn how to create new possibilities that didn't exist before, and we can give birth to a lot of regenerative projects. And that's what we want to do in this learning journey. Is not just to say, oh, these other people with lots of power and influence and a lot of money are doing regenerative finance. I wish I could be like them. No, what we're going to do is say, doesn't matter if I don't have any money. I'm going to participate in the coordination of value as it's created and shared and help build regenerative economies from the ground up and give birth to them everywhere on the planet that it's needed, which is everywhere on the planet. So that's our inspiring possibility. So that said, let's get started. There's no time to waste. Let's start a conversation about all of this, and let's have a discussion. So that's my kickoff presentation for us. I want to really just stress that for me, it's personally quite an honor to be here with all of you, having these conversations. And I'm just really excited to be able to hold space for the brilliance and the awesomeness. I mean, you've probably seen in our first activity, the Seeds of Community activity, where people are introducing themselves and the participants, just how beautifully we're gathering together wonderful people in this cohort. So as of right now, we have about 20 more minutes for the rest of the time for this webinar. And I see that we have 4 questions that have been posted. And so what I'm going to start doing is going through these questions. If you have a question you'd like to ask, just go to the Ask a Question button and ask it. And what I will do is I will invite people onto the screen who ask the questions to participate in discussion a little bit more. And it's not just Joe talking at you the whole time. So I see the first question that's being posed here is by Abel Crawford. So Abel, I'll invite you onto the screen. And if you're not able or you don't want to join for some reason, then just let me know in the chat box. Here it says you're starting to join. Question that Abel asks is, can you explain the value terms, value decomposition that I mentioned? So let's start by saying, what is value? Because value can take many different forms. And hey, Abel, how's it going?
Hey.
Nice to see you. I'd love to just maybe, before I start riffing on this question of value, to just ask you, like, what were you thinking of with this question? What was coming up for you when you posed it?
The value is used together with a lot of terms like value creation, value decomposition. You mentioned a few different value terms, and it's not always lingo that we're up to date with. I've heard of it, but maybe a lot of us also have heard of it, but don't really know what they're talking about.
Yeah, you know,
one thing. The way you're meaning it.
Yeah. One thing I find really helpful is to think of like social values, like values that we'd have in a social sense, like I care about being in community. I care about being validated and seen. You know, there's things that we would say, I value this, or I feel this is important to me. So there'd be things that are a value like that. There are also things that are like functional value, such as, is there healthy soil? And if there's healthy soil, that functions for creating niches for plants so that trees and shrubs and things could grow. Or the functional value of water arriving and being absorbed into the land instead of running off and running away. These are like ecological values. Another way of thinking about value, like value creation, is when things are brought together into a new combination where there's an emergent ability that didn't exist before. So like the example of there being satellite communication that enables us to connect antennas as receivers on our phones and computers and creates the new ability to have remote conversations, which is like a new kind of value because the other way of doing it would have been to travel a long way and find someone. Who knows if you'd find the right person? And so the value creation there might be in efficiency and discovery and learning and connection. And so it might be different ways of understanding what value is. So these are just some ways of thinking about value. Is that helping? Does that make some sense to you? I'm not trying to be exhaustive about it because there are a lot of ways we can talk about this. But is that resonating at all?
Yeah, I think you explained value pretty well. I was just wondering, is there any other terms besides value creation and value decomposition that you used? Or was that basically the two terms?
Well, I would just offer other frames, like what do you value? Or say it in a different word, what do you care about? What's important to you? What would you like to create and what needs does it serve? Because serving needs is of value. Or as JP saying in the chat, what matters? What matters to you or what matters to a community or what matters to a place? I think all of these are questions that get at value. And I think it's very important for any group of people to make visible their implicit assumptions about value. Because people can have very different values and then think they're doing the same thing and they're really not. So this is just the teaser version of longer conversations because there's so much to say here. But yeah, no, thank you for the question and great to get a chance to chat at least for a minute. More to come. Thanks a lot, Abel. Yeah, this is a good way to start, clarifying some of our terms. So the next question I see, which is from Michael. So Michael, I'll invite you onto the screen. And he's asking, do you know anything about the idea of grand solar minimums? Apparently, we're just entering into a period of grand solar minimum. Do you know what impact this could have in combination with other factors and about in the context of the planetary boundaries and holistic ecology? And I think if I understand correctly, Michael is talking about solar flare activity and solar maximums and solar minimums, which relates to the total amount of solar energy emitted from the sun's surface. Let's see if Michael's able to join me if the technology works. Then we'll see if that is the question. Hey, Michael, it says you've accepted and are connecting, so maybe there's just something with the link. I'm not sure what's happening there. We've had technical problems like this before where Crowdcast doesn't quite get connected to a person, so apologies if it doesn't work. But I would say is, if you look at, so this is sort of like a technical point for those who are interested in the relationship between solar weather and the Earth's climate, that basically you have sunspot activity on the sun's surface, and it changes the amount of solar energy reaching the Earth by an amount of 0.01 to 0.03% of the total amount of energy. So from the Earth's point of view, it's a very small fluctuation. What's actually more important than the solar activity is what is called the Milankovitch cycles, which if you'd like to learn more about those under tools and tutorials on Earth Regenerators, which is a topic section on the sidebar, you can go and watch the video on how ice ages happen, which is really about the sun and the Earth having a dynamic relationship and how the Earth's orbit and the Earth's rotation change. And that changes the distribution, north to south, of how much solar energy hits the Earth during the Northern Hemisphere summer, which is related to ice ages. And what I would say is that those things are important, but they're more important to things like large solar flare activity creates a lot of aurora borealis and aurora australis, which is these electrical storms in the upper atmosphere. And sometimes those cause massive brownouts and blackouts of energy grids. So their biggest consequences are actually in energy infrastructure and large-scale centralized energy infrastructure, more so than they are about changing climate. Although there are a couple of specific cases where the solar maximum or the solar minimum, there's a solar minimum event connected with something called the Little Ice Age, or a 70-year cool period in Europe during the Middle Ages. So there's kind of a complex story there. But for our purposes, I would say it's a very small contributing factor relative to other things that are much bigger factors, because we're dealing with a time frame of a couple of decades that while this is a really interesting topic, it might be a little bit of a side topic for what we're talking about in regenerative finance. So Michael, I hope that's adequate for now. We can always talk more about this later as well. But it's really good to have these discussions about planetary dynamics. So I'm trained in Earth system science, so that's something I can help with at least a little bit. So I see Abel has another good question here, which is, and also if anyone else has questions, drop them in the ask a question box, and we'll go through them. So we've got about 10 more minutes here. So Abel's question, and Abel, if it's okay, I just won't invite you back on the screen for this one for the sake of logistics. But Abel's asking, is Seeds just a crowdfunding website that tries to steer collected funds to regenerative projects? If not, what else can it enable? So Tyler Wakefield is going to host a sort of teach-in on Seeds on Earth Day on April 22nd. So we'll be posting an announcement about that soon. So I'll give the very brief version and then let Tyler explain more. But what I would say what the Seeds community is trying to do is create a community that governs itself, that makes decisions about how to use its own currency. So one of the really important things that the Seeds community is doing is creating a regulated marketplace where the members of the community make the rules about how the money works. So it's not that the Federal Reserve, this private bank, that gets to decide how it changes the inflation rate or how much money is printed or something like this, that the members of the Seeds community make those decisions. And by having a democratic process, they can do things like be sure that the currency is stationary instead of inflationary, so it maintains the same value. They can control the money supply. And they can do other things related to the coordination of value creation to support regenerative projects. And so the Seeds community is a global network of people working on community currencies, cryptocurrency, open governance, open intelligence, collective intelligence, and trying to apply these and other things to the facilitation of alternative economic models and to supporting and funding regenerative projects. So the Seeds community is a community. They have a website, they have a digital wallet for their cryptocurrency, they do have a cryptocurrency called the Seed, but there's a lot more going on. And for those of you that's confusing, look for Tyler's message, and you might want to attend his webinar. And also reach out to him personally, because he is an ambassador of the Seeds Network, and he keeps up to date with what's happening at Seeds better than I do. So he'll have more up-to-date and accurate information about what's going on there. But it's a super important question. So Abel, thanks for asking it. Yeah, am I like bombarding you guys with a lot of information? If so, I'm sort of like a fire hose. It's one of the many reasons we'll limit these webinars to an hour so that I don't hit you with too much information. But yeah, let's keep going with the questions. Are there other questions being posed? Let's see, I've got some new ones here. Here's another one by Michael. Michael's asking, have you thought of doing Kickstarter, Indiegogo campaign to get more exposure in a slightly different crowdfunding model? Perhaps offering your book as one of the rewards, and perhaps offering footage or documentation of regeneration efforts in Colombia. And the answer to all of these is yes. We did GoFundMe campaign for the Bodichara Regeneration Fund, and about $12,000 of the money we raised was on GoFundMe. We can use Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or other crowdfunding platforms in the future. Also, my book is being freely given away. It's just about to go to the publisher. So we're preparing to have all proceeds of book sales go to regenerative funds. So I'm not going to personally make any money off of my book. It's just going to be fed forward into the system as a signal of regenerative relationships. So we're preparing that as a reward as part of this process. And the book organized a lot of people in the Earth Regenerators community, so it's already created a lot of value. As far as creating footage and documentation, I have a dear friend named Stefan who was here in Badichara a couple months ago, created a lot of drone footage, and we're going to release the first video with the completion of a land purchase later this week. So look on Earth Regenerators later this week for a drone video of the Origin of Water Nature Reserve that we're setting up. And we'll be documenting other things as well. And all of that is just to say yes, 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 and yes to all of these great questions. Thank you, Michael, for asking them. And what I want to say is, during our time in this learning journey, I would like to invite what we're doing in Badichara to be a sandbox to play in. So I'll be sharing more of what we're doing here, possibly inviting other members of our team who are doing the work here to join us for some of the discussions and to participate in new projects that will be emerging, including a very important one that we talked about in the work group for that fund, a piece of land called Las Albercas. But more on that another time. Great question, Michael. I see Sebastian has, oh wait, there's another question here by an unnamed user. Somebody didn't put their name in. That's actually got the most votes at the moment. And I will invite the unnamed user, whoever they are, to join the screen. Maybe if they didn't want to give their name, they may not want to come on the screen, but you're very welcome. And your question is, yeah, who's in the mask? Thank you, Ellen. Should regenerative finance be a paradigm applied to society in general, or is it better applied to specific problems? Can subsets of competitive or capitalist economic systems coexist with regenerative financial systems? Great question. Oh, hey, is it Todd? How's it going?
I'm good.
Awesome. Let's talk a little about this. I think your question is very important to ask in the context of creating contexts. Do you catch my drift? Like, in what context are we working? I'm curious if you have thought of places where regenerative finance might play with the capitalist system, or examples where it might be better to protect it from the capitalist system. Is this something you've been dabbling in? It seems like you put a lot of thought into the question, like you've been thinking about this before.
Yeah, my thought was basically more that is there a place for people to compete in such a system where the fundamental idea is that we need to get over our differences and work together for something better and greater? Is the grand thought that we need to align interests, or is it that we need to basically set aside our interest for something greater? That is my point, I guess.
That's a good way to phrase the question. I'll share a little piece of research in evolutionary studies that's quite useful here. It's what's called multi-level selection. So very brief background. For about 80 years, there was an equivalent of the nature versus nurture debate, which turned out like it's both, duh, right? In evolution, there was a parallel thing about whether evolution was always at the level of individuals or if it could apply to groups. So it's individual selection versus group selection. Turns out that you can have multiple levels of evolution happening at the same time. So you can have two individual members of a basketball team competing, and also have the basketball team playing against the basketball team, and also have one set of basketball teams in one competition competing against another that's going to move together later, and so on and so forth. So you can have competition and cooperation both occurring and have different scales of activity happening in parallel with each other. And the reason this is important for your question is that the way to outcompete the competitors is to out-cooperate them. So the shorthand for this is that competition within groups beats groups. Competition between groups beats non-cooperative groups. So if you have a group that cooperates well and it competes against a group that doesn't cooperate well, the cooperating group is going to tend to do better. So you can have competition and cooperation happening at the same time. And this is really important for us to understand because as we're building regenerative economic models, they might be initiated at one scale because they're relatively protected against a larger economic pattern. But we want to build their strength to compete with that larger economic pattern. So for example, we might work with a housing association or a co-housing project to create some kind of a regulated space that doesn't compete in the speculative land market, but is smaller in scale. So that these two different scales are happening at the same time, but we're focusing our design work on one scale and not the other. So I think this is going to be like a helpful way of thinking. And as you apply it to different contexts, it'll give you different insights. But overall, what I see is the ways that the extractive systems work is they tend to grow exponentially, but they tend to go into overshoot and collapse, like civilizations have throughout history. And so what we need is systems that can survive those overshoot and collapse patterns and create something that's healthy and more resilient during and after. So in that sense, what we're looking at really is how to cooperate with those who are doing this kind of work at whatever scale is appropriate to the problem that we're working on. And there'll be different scales for different problems. So it's very contextual in that sense. You go into a context and ask yourself, how would you do it here? And you'd come up with a different design approach than maybe in a different context. Does that sort of make sense? And does that resonate with you?
You answer one question and you create 100 more. So but you answered the question.
Yeah, that's part of the fun. So we can play around with this as we get into exploring the design of regenerative projects. Of which specific problems are we working on, what would be the design process that's most appropriate to them, and then how do cooperation and competition work. These are just be part of the design. So this is super important stuff and definitely not going to be resolved in like 5 minutes of commentary. Yeah, is there anything else? Does this make sense? Is it clear for now at least?
I think I'll just think about it and ask more next time.
Perfect. Thanks so much. I'm glad you're here.
Thanks.
Awesome. I see we're actually getting close to time. Wait, there it is. So we're about at the hour, and I see that we still have 2 more questions. So I think what might be nice is for us to just go a little over the hour, if that's okay, and be sure these 2 questions get answered. But I'll try to answer them quickly. So the first question is by Abel again, very popular question maker. It's like, what can we expect to be exposed to in this learning journey? Just so we can get a rough sense of what the next 2 months might look like. I think what we're going to be exposed to in the next 2 months is a combination of 3 things. One thing is specific kinds of research or models or tools, like John Fullerton has a framework for regenerative economics. What is that? Or Regenesis Group has a regenerative design framework. What is that? Or the Common Land Foundation has this idea of 4 returns in economic zones. What is that? So one kind of thing you'll be exposed to is specific tools and frameworks. And so we'll be doing that. Second thing you'll be exposed to is a set of like-minded people and the ability to do things together and to learn together and build relationships with each other. So that at the end of the 2 months, you'll probably feel more ready to start projects than you are now. Or if you have projects, you'll be able to take your projects further than you will now. Now, the third thing I think you can expect is that this remains somewhat unclear and emergent and messy the entire time, and that does not end at the end of 2 months. That it is unreasonable to expect for us to have fully formed regenerative projects and a deep understanding of regenerative finance in 2 months. I think what we're going to have is enough knowledge to be dangerous, enough friends to be supportive to try things in sandboxes that are relatively safe to play in, and we're going to experiment with some stuff. And along the way, we're going to be exposed to specific knowledge and frameworks that's going to help us to do that. And if we do this well, at the end of the 2 months, this group of people will want to keep going, and we might structure it differently. We might open it to the larger network. We'll see what it looks like at that point in time to support whatever develops after these 2 months. So I hope that is a little clear, at least, because this is such a good question, that we will have learned a few things, practice working together and built some relationships, and we will still be unresolved and incomplete in what we're trying to do, but we'll have learned enough to be initiated and prepared to do the work coming out of these 2 months. And some of the work will have been done during the 2 months, but most of the really interesting stuff will happen afterwards as each of us continues in our own learning journeys and in the projects that emerge. Hope that makes enough sense. Trying to be fairly quick here because I want to be mindful of time. And there's one question left here from Sebastian, where he asks, what are the ways or qualitative shifts in relating to people and dynamic conversation? What is ways or qualitative shifts, ways of relating qualitative shifts that I've experienced and have helped me find a better tuned alignment to help me finance out there in a healthy way, to help relate to finance out there in a healthy way? One thing I learned was to definancialize my life. The more that I didn't depend on debt-based currency and I didn't have to work for a living, the more I was able to devote myself to regenerative things. And this is something that we can talk about a lot more. How to be what I call independently poor instead of independently rich, which is sort of a joke. You don't need a lot of money to be empowered to live without needing a lot of money. So one way that I've personally done it is by definancializing my life. Simple example, when we moved to Seattle 13 years ago, my wife and I got rid of our car because we could get around on bikes and in public transit. And that lowered the cost of how much money we had to earn to have a car. So it definancialized our lives. I like how Josh is saying definancialize my mind. Decolonization is a big thing. We've been decolonizing ourselves a lot. We're not done, but we're on a journey. Been on that journey for almost 20 years. So decolonizing and definancializing, paradoxically, the more you definancialize from extractive systems, the better you can create regenerative financial flows, whether you're using the money system of the dominant economy or not. So, so those are a lot more. Those are like the teasers. I want to really be mindful of time. I see Jonathan's asking a question here that just popped up, so I'll answer it real quick. Is there a plan to make public any collaborators who are taking responsibility for this so you don't become a bottleneck to preserve my time? Hell yes, Jonathan. The way we're doing that is we are creating a distributed network of decentralized leadership. And that's what these project teams will be. So the idea is to have our host team. 2 members of the host team will be facilitating Group A's community Zoom call. 2 other members will be hosting Group B's Zoom call. I will not be facilitating those. And that's already sharing the workload. And then we're going to share that forward into the participants to then share it into the projects that emerge, so that we have a decentralized ecosystem of projects, any of which can run autonomously and does not depend on this white guy from the United States living in Colombia making any decisions or being a bottleneck. So heck yes, we're going to do that. Awesome. So in closing today's session, what I want to say is I'm super excited that we're on this learning journey together. We're going to learn so much during the next 2 months. And if we do this right, we can deal with this emerging and imminent planetary crisis in empowered and healing ways that support and nourish our hearts, our souls, our whole bodies, our whole persons, and things that we care about. So thank you all for being here. If you haven't done so yet, join one of the community Zoom cohorts. If you have any questions, bounce me a question or the other hosts. That's Jeff McNeely, Penny Heipel, Tyler Wakefield, and PJ Connolly. And we're here to help you guys. That's what we're doing this for. So thank you all for being here, and let's go forth and do this. Zoom calls tomorrow and Wednesday for the next round. I'll be posting the next event for next week's webinar very soon. And onward we go. Thank you so much, and I look forward to continuing this journey with all of you. Thank you and goodbye.